The expectation is that all these would come in next few months. There have been changes in FDI on how much can be invested in FIIs in case of Indian equity and commodity exchanges. I caught up with Mrugank, who is the MD and CEO of MCX, and began by asking him how is this space moving and what are their priorities and action planned for the next few years.
I think, to me, this is one of the biggest plus points that I see. And again, the reason I say this is there are enough studies which will tell you that globally, commodities is X times, the securities market. In India, we are 1 by X, maybe literally in that proportion. So if we have to see the growth of commodities, I think it's very important that everything actually falls in place. So to that extent, options coming in, yes, and I think we've heard members SEBI say that in very categoric manner in terms of how he sees the timeline on that. One of my colleagues, Singhal Saab, is part of the advisory committee. So we are actively participating and making sure that, both our views are heard as well as we are fully prepared. So I again see this as a very positive development. In terms of the shareholding and other things, welcome development. Again, as an economy, I think we need more foreign participation in the economy in general, which is why FII, FDI is always welcome in this country. And therefore, what's being proposed is again welcome from this segment as well.
You're the only listed exchange as well, so there are more eyes than, there's more attention here than anywhere else. And there has been so many times in news that always pops up after every 2 to 3 months on how perhaps Kotak is selling stakes, somebody else from the international exchange is buying it or what. Would you want to clarify that?
Okay, so I'll just add probably 2 or 3 points. One, as part of my, I won't call induction because it wasn't really induction, but in terms of after I came in, I've met most of our significant investors. The idea was to understand what they're looking for, and the idea was to just give them an idea of what I really think we should be doing. Second, I really believe, and allow me to stray a little bit, but I genuinely believe, just like in a fund house, you have an operations head and a fund manager, and one looks at how you run the sort of operations, the other one decides the investments. I really believe we are the platform, and as a company, I can talk about MCX. Investment decisions, you should talk to the investors.
All right, the other thing is about MCX and SX dealings. Now, what's happening there? Because there have been reports on perhaps the exchanges would want to settle it out of court. What is the latest on that?
So again, and I don't know whether you were expecting a different answer, but it is a sub judice matter. So I'm really afraid I can't add more to it just now.
All right. Another positive thing that came in was about SEBI telling listed companies to reveal on their hedging, numbers and stuff. How positive is that? And do you see liquidity really increasing? Because many of the corporates still talk about that one thing.
Absolutely. So again, this goes back to your first question about, in terms of more participants. So to us, there are 2 things happening in the ecosystem. Regulators actually looking at commodities as a risk mitigating sort of insurance product rather than, and regulators buying in equally what we have always maintained, that we are actually a risk mitigator insurance type of product and not really a speculative only exchange. So to us, that's a positive sign. What we intend to do, 2 or 3 things. One, we already have a team in place, which is more in terms of our corporate calling team, which is now going to engage with the seriously senior people in all the larger corporates and explain to them again from grassroots saying why they should be on MCX. So to us, it is a very positive development from a longer term perspective. The fact that SEBI listing norms are changed, RBI is as well asking banks to do it, so that augurs very well for MCX.
There are other participants as well, SMEs and the smaller companies. Do you see them coming as well?
Yeah, I think for them, and again, they might be, because they're not listed, so they won't get impacted by these norms. But to me, again, that's where we have to play a role in terms of developmental activity. So, and again, I was just taking some stock in terms of trainings that we've done. So we've clocked in the last 3 years more than 1 training a day somewhere in this country. More than 40% of our trainings are towards the hedger segment, and most of these are towards, so when it comes to products like metals, they are towards that SME segment. So we are working a lot with industry associations, and our attempt is to make sure that the real SME segment, which is the focus of everybody in the ecosystem, understands the benefit of hedging. We make sure that we really explain to them why this is completely different from trading, and that their interest should be in hedging and not trading as well. So we do as much as we can, but to us, again, those are longer term initiatives that we'll have to continue to work.
How is the working relation with SEBI now? Because we understand they're working very closely with exchanges, with brokers, looking at the kind of changes that they want to bring about. How soon, how much, and how do you see an on-ground preparation of that?
So again, and personally, when I was sort of taking up my role, one comfort I had was that in my previous jobs, I had always worked with SEBI in some capacity or the other, and the fact that SEBI was now the regulator for this market was actually a very comforting thing for me. If we look at every aspect, so day one of this job, I actually ended up in a meeting where we were discussing the risk management parameters for commodity exchanges. So whether it is the risk side or whether it is like the development where we spoke about the Development Advisory Committee, SEBI is engaging with all participants, including there has been a SEBI committee now constituted to look at if SEBI was to allow brokers who have a membership on one exchange and the other, but to allow them to combine it, what would need to be done. So I think the consultative process is working extremely well, and I think that's really the way forward for this market, is that it has to be very consultative with both industry, exchange and regulator together. So it can't be in isolation for us as well.
So, you talked about spending, on how technology is perhaps the major one point that you would want to put money in first. Going forward, if you had to put it on paper, technology is where your spending is going in. What is the major commodities that you would want to push at this point? Because at one point, crude was doing very well. Metals, of course, is yet another area where MCX sees a huge participation coming in. So how would you put that in sectors? Spending, market share, going forward, what kind of growth do you see in the company?
So if you're looking at, is there any one particular sector that we really look at these four? I won't single out any, because there's different opportunities that we have and different challenges. So clearly on the base metal aspect, there is a requirement both from participants, industry and regulators to look at how we can make these more deliverable. From the bullion perspective, I think all of us need to think, and I mentioned this, that as amongst the largest consumers of this commodity, why are we still a price taker and not a price giver? So we need to work towards making sure that whatever investment we do, we work towards an ecosystem which takes India on that path. For just MCX as an exchange, agri is something which we haven't given enough weightage to, so that's where we will put in more. So depending on what it is, when you look at the technology, it's agnostic. You really create a platform which is for trading, and therefore it is not. It's completely agnostic to that sector. Where we will do in terms of the investment, which will be different, is that for some of these sectors we might hire more people because we don't have that expertise. For some of these sectors we might just go and work more with current folks, but invest more in terms of either marketing or in terms of building out. So it's going to be different expenditure in all. For me, it's like, the four sons I have, or the four daughters I have, sorry to be, but, can't differentiate really which one of them will take precedence.